If you feel you have been exposed to radioactive or other hazardous materials in the course of your duties, contact your radiation
Wakati factory ilijengwa, ulikuwa na hisia ya kwamba italeta kazi kwa hii mji, watu wa hii mji wataenda huko kufanya kazi, itakuwa kitu mzuri, ama ulikuwa na hisia?
Wakati walikuja kuweka hii mashini hapa, wenyewe hata kuja kujulisha watu wa mtaa, sisi tuligutuka tu, mashini imewekwa na inamwaga sumu.
If a crow flew over Kenya, what would it see? The contradiction of places with glittering promise, or on the same soil, places shattered by broken promises.
I had worked for business all this time, and I had very, very good relations with all the government agencies. I believed that they were good and they would take action.
If the crow walked unnoticed among us, would it see how children under the same sky lived very different lives? Or how industry has produced death?
Najua sasa serikali yetu inakimbilia Al-Shabaab ya punduki. Lakini sisi ndio tumeuawa.
How about you? If you flew as a crow does, what would you see? The steady staccato sound of metal against metal. Not an unfamiliar one to 49-year-old Scholastica Shikanga. She's sewing her grandson Kelvin Musyoka's school shirt. She may not have much, but this skill helps put food on the table for them. That says a lot about her. After all, she lives in Owino Uhuru, a picture of poverty that paints itself. But hemmed in between her tightly sealed lips is a story deeper than the dire poverty that surrounds us as we sit down to talk. And it has everything to do with her grandson, Kelvin.
Kelvin Musyoka alizaliwa mwaka 2006. Akiwa na afya njema, hakuwa na shida yoyote. Kelvin alifika mwaka 2008 mwezi wa 3. Nikaona sasa mtoto ameanza kushtuka kama ni mtu wa kifafa. Mtoto alipoanza kushtuka nikafikiria labda na kuharisha na mambo mengine, mwili kutoka harara. Nikafikiria labda ni climate. Nikachukua hatua nikaenda Coast Children's Hospital. Nilipofika pale nikaelezea daktari, waliniandikia tu madawa, wakaniambia naenda uchukue madawa upatie mtoto. Niliporudi nyumbani, Kelvin sikuona dalili tofauti yoyote. Mwaka 2009 mtoto alikuwa ameanza kutambaa sasa, kubwa karibu miaka 3 hivi. Na nilikuwa nakaa karibu na ile mtaro yenye ilikuwa inatoa maji kwa Metal Refinery episode.
Kelvin came from school and made his ball out of Manila paper and went into the field to play. And he kicked the ball and it went into a trench. And as a small boy, he went and picked the ball from the trench. But he didn't know that what he had stepped in was effluent from Metal Refinery.
Mtoto niliporudi nikapata mtoto kitole kimechomeka kama ule mwenye amekanyaka kwa chifu ya moto. Nikachukulia tu ni msaa labda ni mtoto amechomeka. Hicho kitole kikasiti kuendelea kikipambuka.
Scholastica didn't know it at the time, but starting 2008, when Kelvin started falling ill, they were living in the shadow of a new neighbor. That was the year Metal Refinery EPZ Limited, a lead smelting and recycling plant, began its operations. It was touted as a game changer for Owino Uhuru, giving the men of the village work that was sorely needed. And the face of Metal Refinery EPZ then was Phyllis Omido.
Of course, they were paying me very well. They were paying me very well according to the Kenyan standards. They were paying me over 100,000 at that time, which was very good money for someone like me. I was supposed, first of all, to carry out an environmental impact assessment.
While Phyllis thought that the environmental impact assessment of the factory's operations would be fairly standard, the environment around little Kelvin was already changing.
Sasa nikachukua hatua tena nikapeleka hospitali. Daktari na hospitali wakafikiria labda ni ile ugonjwa wa ngozi. Wakaniandikia dawa. Hiyo dawa nikaenda kununua 600. Hakuna dalili yoyote. Mtoto akalisituka na hiyo kitole. Hiyo kukichikosa kusa ni kuharisha, nikachukua tena hatua nikaenda State House. Ile hospitali ya Chase sababu sasa Makadara nimeshindwa kwa miaka 2. Nikaenda State House. Hakuna tofauti. Nikakaa nikasema sasa hapa ikiwa hospitali za serikali zimeshindikana nitakimbilia wapi?
She turned to private hospitals. Bill after bill came in, but no answers came along with the paperwork. Kelvin got worse.
I was supposed to rally the community to sign. You know, part of an EIA is that you get the community to sign and accept that they know what you're going to do and all that. But when I talked to a lead expert accredited by NEMA, he told me most of my work is management and I've not been someone who paid a lot of attention to science. And some things you know, but they are at the back of your mind. He asked me, do you know what they are making? And I said, yeah, metals. And he said, no, they're making lead. Do you know what lead is? I said, yeah, it's a metal.
1 year and many hospital trips later, when getting the results of a blood test, a doctor asked Scholastica a curious question.
Kaniambia, mama, unakaa karibu na kampuni gani? Kamwambia ninakaa karibu na kampuni 2, moja ni corrugated inatengeneza mabati na nyingine inaitwa Metal Refinery EPZ. Akaniuliza inatengeneza, nikamwambia nasikia inatengeneza mabetri. Kaniambia, mama, hiyo kampuni ndio imeaffect mtoto, ana vyuma risasi kwa mwili wake.
So it's the lead expert actually who started explaining to me. His name was Fred. He said, Phyllis, you can do this because you're being paid to do your job. But the fact is, if you tell these people that this is going to give them jobs and it's good for them, you're lying to them. Because I've seen the whole setup of this place. And if you do this, you're going to expose this community and they're going to die.
The grim prophecy being delivered to Phyllis was already a reality for Kelvin, Scholastica's sickly grandson.
Machipu ilipotoka ikapatikana ni 26 mara ya kwanza. Hapo mara ya 26 kaniambia mpaka tena mtoto amalize mwaka. Utafiti mwingine ufanywe. Tujue ni nini inaendelea kwa mtoto. Ilipofika 2011 tena baada ya mwaka nikarutisha mtoto birth care. Ukachukua damu. Kaniambia after 7 days urudi siku ya 8. Nikarudi siku ya 8 ikapatikana ni 28.
Kelvin had 28 parts per million of lead in his blood. If his blood was water, then for every 1 liter of water, he would have 28 milligrams of lead, a highly dangerous level, especially for a child.
Lead is a cumulative toxic metal. If it's exposed for a long time, then it can have various adverse effects on the body, including its effect on the brain, the central nervous system, and the kidney. Children, in fact, absorb lead at a faster rate than adults, so it affects the mental development of children.
From intense stomach cramps to skin lesions and rashes, Kelvin's body was shutting down, and his grandmother had run out of money.
Msaya akapita atoroka aende nyumbani. Sasa ikiwa msaya amenitoroka, Kelvin naye ndio huyo, mimi naye ndio huyo, nimefutwa kazi, nitakimbilia wapi?
Kelvin isn't the only child who has suffered serious health complications in Owino Uhuru. If anything, he's one of the lucky ones. Death has often gazed upon Owino Uhuru's children and parted young friends from each other. A new toilet is being built on what should be holy ground here. This lush-looking piece of land, fertilized by the sewers of the village, is a children's graveyard. A blank cross nearly blends in with the ground, marking yet another life extinguished. Just 1 week before we got here, Victor Onyango was buried here. He was just 10 months old. In a home close by, his mother, 32-year-old Catherine Awor Akello, has been shocked into silence. It takes me a while to get her to talk to me about what happened, and when she does, a matter-of-fact response, emptied of the emotion of a grieving mother, comes out.
Mtoto vile nilimzaa akaanza kugonjeka kidogo, mwili ulikuwa moto, mtoto alikuwa anakohoa na anatapika. Nikampeleka hospitalini, akapewa tu madawa. Baada ya mwezi 8 nikampeleka hospitalini, akapimwa. Akapatikana ni mgonjwa. Baada alikuwa anagonjeka tu mpaka akaenda.
Catherine's child was found to have lead poisoning. So do 2 of her other children. She's also been very ill and can barely walk. Her pale feet look drained of blood. Her relatives think she could be anemic, a telltale sign of chronic lead poisoning. But she's not thinking about herself.
Nasikia vibaya kwa sababu mtoto wangu mdogo aliniachia baada kama sikake bado.
Her pain is hidden behind tired eyes, all cried out. But since 2008 in Owino Uhuru, pain has become commonplace, and bearing with it is expected. Not far from Catherine's house, we find another family seated outside their home. This is 2.5-year-old Philemon Otieno. Ever since he was born, he's had skin complications that sound a lot like those of Scholastica Shikanga's grandson, Kelvin's.
Kianzo chenyewe ilianza hapa katikati utosi. Alafu ndiko akaendelea hivyo hata nipe kashika hii shikio. Ikateremka akakuwa kama huu mwili wote umeharibika. Alafu ikaendelea ndipo ikajashika hapa mguu. Akapelekwa hapa kwa masista, akaenda patiwa madawa, vikafanya kama vyapona, vikarudi, akampeleka Menispa, vikarudi, akapelekwa paka Potrizi, akipimwa damu, anasemekana si mgonjwa yoyote na vidonda yuko navyo.
He has no medicine, no salve for his wounds. And so, at 2 years old, he does the best he can to keep flies away from his leg. Next to him, his cousin Salma can barely see out of one eye. Seated along an alley, we find Elizabeth Akinyi and her 2-year-old daughter. It's no different. Her back ravaged by sickly scales. And like Philemon and Kelvin, no answers have come from doctors.
Waliniambia tu nitumie hiyo dawa. Wajaniambia nitumie dawa itaisha.
It's an open-air waiting room of sorts. children with all sorts of afflictions staring out into the world for help and getting a blank response in return. And from above, they're being watched by the tall chimneys of a factory that spewed lead into their neighborhood.
In such an environment, lead normally is ingested through inhalation. The emissions of dust, the community might inhale the dust.
The dust laden with lead often gathers outside 23-year-old Esther Mawia Mudhambi's door, so she spends part of her mornings sweeping it right back out. She's a newlywed. Her husband and her moved into their bedsitter a few months ago, but she's lived in Owino Uhuru for 10 years. She giggles when I joke with her about their honeymoon period, but my 2 questions after that change her mood almost immediately.
Umejaribu kupata mtoto?
Bado.
Mbona?
Nilikuwa class 7 kuja nikapata mimba. Hiyo mimba nikailea kafikisha 7 months. Na kawa naenda kliniki Makadara. Day moja nikaenda huko, nikatumwa niende kwa daktari mkubwa. Kufika kaambiwa mtoto amekufa ndani ya tumbo. Wakanipea dawa, mtoto akatoka. Kakaa tena 2013 nikabeba tena mimba hivyo hivyo. Nikailea kwa miezi 7. Kwenda Portrees, nikaambiwa mtoto amekufia kwa tumbo. Wakanipea dawa, mtoto akatoka. Sasa sikuelewa shida ya tumbo ni nini. Na kila ninapowauliza hata wasemangi ni nini mbaya. Either watasema waoshe tumbo, wengine wanakataa. Au utasikia wakisema watoe kizazi, madaktari wanakataa. Sasa sikuwahi kujua shida gani nini.
Up the alleyway from her, 25-year-old Lynette Ouma tells me the same story. In late 2010, 2 years after the refinery opened, she gave birth to a boy. Right from the start, he was unwell. So one day she went to hospital and asked to be tested alongside her child to establish whether it was her who was responsible for her child's illness. Like Scholastica, she was asked a question.
Kaniuliza kwani waka wapi? Mimi nikaambia nakaa mtaa unaitwa Kunouru. Na alafu kuna kampuni ngapi hapo? Mimi nikawaambia kuna kampuni nyingi, lakini yenye inaweza kuniduru vile ninavyoona ile inatoa moshi ya mabetri. Akasema sawa. Sasa wakatupima na kweli wakapata hiyo shida iko.
Her child died soon after. He's buried here in the same graveyard as Victor Onyango. In 2014, after 2 consecutive miscarriages, she got pregnant again.
Tukaendelea hivyo. Sasa kufika huyo mtoto alikuwa anafikisha miezi 5 mwaka jana, ilikuwa mwezi wa 6. Kweli mimi nilikuwa nimeenda huko kanisani. Ilikuwa sasa naanza tu kuuma ni kama nataka kuzaa. Sasa nashinda nataka kuzaa na mtoto ndio kuna miezi 5. Sasa baada ya maombi maji kamwagika hapa kanisani. Wakanibeba wakanipeleka hospitalini hapa Madamadea. Kufika pale kweli huyo mtoto akafanya nini? Akatoka. Wakaniosha wakaniregesha.
Sasa hiyo ndo agena ni umanga tu sana. Hata najiuliza kwa nini Mungu asinipee mtoto wangu hata mimi. Natamani watoto hata mimi.
Uzuri wa ndoa ni kuwa na mtoto hapa. Kama sivyo utaachwa hapa na Bwana ataenda kuleta mwingine.
They both feel alone, but are part of a much wider group of women who would rather suffer in silence than ever speak out to each other about it.
Kuna wengine walijifungua tu hivyo hivyo, lakini hata sijawauliza aga ilikuwaje. Sikuwauliza.
So hamuongei?
Na wako kwao na mimi niko huku kwangu.
Between 2009 and 2012, around there, the smoke was so bad that nobody could carry their pregnancy to term in Owino Uhuru. They would miscarry at 6.5, 7 months. 6.5, 7 months they would miscarry. That was the longest someone would carry their pregnancies. They'd get pregnant again and that would happen again. It actually traumatized them so much.
Lakini nahofia hata nikipata pia itafanyika tu vile vile. Hiyo hofu bado niko nayo.
Because of her loss, Lynette hardly visits the children's graveyard anymore.
Seeing this freshly dug grave of a 10-month-old baby buried last week makes you reflect as a parent on what it would be like if you had to bury your own child because of toxicity in the environment in which you live. And even in death, this child and probably all of the children who are buried beside him, who happen to be quite a number, will be stalked by the toxicity of lead poisoning because the effluent that has affected this community so badly flows through this very graveyard. Now next year, when little Victor's body has decomposed and more children will likely die, the people who buried him say they're going to come dig up his grave because there's no room here and bury someone else. Think about that. That is the indignity in which the people of Uhuru Owino live. This really is a land that Kenya forgot.
But if the environment surrounding Owino Uhuru was unsafe, the conditions inside the factory were dangerously toxic. Men were falling sick and dying, and the owners of the factory wanted to keep it quiet.
He gave me a check. Yeah, but he gave me that check with a condition. They gave me documents and to sign that I would not disclose anything that was going on there.
After being informed of the deadly effects of the lead by a heavy metals expert, a Mr. Fred Awiti, in 2009, just months after the plant had begun operations, Phyllis went to the ground and did some research for herself about what was happening next door in Owino Uhuru. It was at this point that she would cross paths with Scholastica Shikanga and heard Kelvin Musyoka's story. Her initial reaction was to tell her bosses, the directors of Metal Refinery EPZ, the truth of what was happening.
All they were doing is they had a propeller which was pushing the lead dust into the chimney and dropping it into the community. So when we told him that this does not meet standards. When we spoke to him, he said if I'd wanted to spend money, good money on this, I would not have invested in Kenya.
At this point, Phyllis' main concern was for the residents of Owino Uhuru, who were already starting to feel the effects of the lead being pumped out of the metal refinery. She didn't know it then, but her manager's attitude towards improving quality would hurt her even more. Like any doting mother, Phyllis is quick to ensure that her son washes up and has a good, healthy snack after school. She freely admits that, being a single mother, she's very close to her son. But Metal Refinery EPZ would bring them even closer together.
At that time, I was still breastfeeding him, and he used to be brought to work. I had a car then, so I would send someone to pick him from home, bring him to work. I'll spend lunch hour with him, and then take him back because I was staying in Chuda. It wasn't very far from Changamwe where I was working. And while we were still in that process, my son got very sick. That was the first time he started having fever spikes. I'd never seen anything like that. So I started going in out of hospital for over a month. Malaria was negative, typhoid was negative. You know, the test for the normal things. Yeah. So there was somewhere where there was a red showing that there was something wrong with his blood. But the doctors didn't know what it was exactly. They kept saying there's an infection somewhere, but we can't catch it. We don't know what it is. It was while I was in hospital that a friend from one of the government agencies came to visit me. And he told me, Phyllis, have you considered that maybe it could be lead poisoning?
For the first time, she was now in the same position as the residents of Owino Uhuru. She would confront her employers, asking them to pay for her son's treatment.
And I went back there and told them, you're going to pay the bill.
Did he?
Yes. He gave me a check. Yeah. But he gave me that check with a condition. They gave me documents and to sign that I would not disclose anything that was going on there. In return, they paid my son's bill. They gave me a check of 230,000.
Their attempt to keep Phyllis quiet was an ominous sign that the owners of the factory were bent on making a profit at whatever cost. The factory itself sits on land designated as an export processing zone. Mikindani is among the few areas in Mombasa that were planned as such. That the lead smelting plant was actually an export processing zone meant that the products it exported would not attract any taxation as long as they were not sold locally. And as we would find out, the Kenya lead recycling business was as profitable as businesses came. The business would buy scrap lead products like used car batteries at an average of 12 shillings a kilogram. Metal Refinery would buy scrap by the ton as they exported lead of similar amounts. So for every ton bought, they would spend a paltry 12,000 shillings. The recycling process would reclaim 75% of the lead, with 25% of it as ash and slag. As the lead ingots were recycled for export, they would fetch international prices. The price of lead on the London Metal Exchange has, over the past few years, oscillated between lows of $1,600 per ton to $2,000 per ton. Meaning that for every 12,000 shillings they spent on the raw product, they generated up to 180,000 shillings in the final product. According to insiders, even after subtracting salaries, overheads like fuel and chemicals, the Metal Refinery could make 10 to 15% profit every month. And in Mikindani, they had other advantages: cheap labor, powerful connections, corruption, and from what we've seen in Owino Uhuru, a complete disregard for the lives of poor people. The story of Metal Refinery's ability to operate across the years of 2009 and 2014 reveals this. Two of the government's agencies, the National Environmental Management Authority, NEMA, and the Ministry of Public Health are the stars on this stage. Acting Director of Compliance and Enforcement at NEMA, Zephaniah Ouma, who was appointed after the closure of Metal Refinery EPZ, has been left holding the baby in this paper trail of confusion on his predecessor's behalf. And John Ndungu, the Senior Public Health Officer in Mombasa County, has his name all over numerous documents that had audited Metal Refinery EPZ over the years. But when their narratives are put together,
this was a multi-agency assignment, and there were always a multi-agency inspectors going on site.
The whole Department of Public Health in the whole of process of opening the plant was not informed. At all, it was not informed.
We are in record. I can share with you a letter from the ministry. I don't know who signed it, whether it's the same officer, giving a green bill of health for the facility. I have it in my file.
To date, I've never, according to the requirements of MCA, when the client intends to open up a plant, is supposed to produce an environmental impact assessment report, which is submitted to NEMA. Then NEMA submits the lead agent. We are one of the lead agents.
Did you ever receive?
We have never received to date.
So it is NEMA.
So I don't know whether the environmental assessment was done or not.
While Public Health and NEMA were unsure about whose role it was to police the factory, profits were good. Workers there were being poorly paid, denied insurance, and death was walking in step with many of them.
Nilikuwa nachemsha vyuma na kuvunja vyuma pale na kuweka kwenye marotari, kuweka marotari kwenye kunachemsha vyuma yani pale ndani, ilikuwa nimeandikwa permanent pale. Hasa hali ya kuendelea pale kaanza kudhoofika.
When George Charo was sent home by the management of metal refineries, he was on his last legs. Almost every symptom of lead poisoning had manifested in his body. Today, his blackened palms and blotched skin reminds him of that time. He was sent home in line with regulations given to the factory by the Ministry of Public Health, indicating that among other things, if an employee had more than 15 parts per million of lead in his blood, they were supposed to be sent home. But like George, Eric, the factory supervisor, and other factory workers knew all too well, these regulations were hardly ever followed and working conditions were very difficult.
Kila mara ulikuwa unakuta mtu kibarua ameanguka chini, amesirai, anakimbizwa hospitalini. Mara kidogo mtu amesirai, anapelekwa nje na mwagiwa maji.
Wasweti kama nguruwe pale mahali. Na ukijapatikana pale uko hapo juu, utajulikana kwamba yule bwana anakula haki yake kweli. Kwa sababu yani una sweti kila mahali.
Tulipouliza hao Wahindi wenye tulikuwa nao, sasa wale ni kusini mbele yangu, niliwauliza ni nini inaendelea, kwa nini watu wanakuwa kianguka hiyo. Wakatuambia hiyo fume ya moshi ambayo ilikuwa inatoka hapo ndani ilikuwa ina sumu nyingine kali sana, ambao walikuwa wanatuambia sisi vile tumeanza kufanyia kazi tufanye tu, lakini tujue maisha yetu ikataribu, hatutakuwa na maisha zaidi. Niliweza kuwauliza kwa kiundani sana, na nyinyi je, maisha yenu iko vipi na tunafanya pamoja? Walituambia wanachukua calcium tablets.
Then lead has no non-biological function. So in the body it competes with calcium. It replaces calcium in the bones.
Nikawauliza kwa nini sisi hamwezi mkatupatia. Walituambia wa Afrika hata wakikufa hakuna hasara kwa sababu wako na nguvu nyingi sana za kufanya hiyo kazi.
And there are graves that speak to this statement. George takes us to one of them, to a man he knew well. Kept in his memory by these faded photographs. This is George's older brother, Karisa. George and Karisa worked together on the factory floor at Metal Refinery, EPZ.
Tukaendelea pale, mimi nikabidi kaachana na ile kazi kwa sababu nilikuwa mwili wangu hauwezi naona. Fika nyumbani nilikaa kama 3 months. Brada wangu asikia hali yake mbovu sana. Kufika hapa nikuja kupata brada wangu mzee, yani hali yake sio nzuri.
Karisa's remains are somewhere on this 1/8 of an acre. He died in 2010. It used to be family land, but they sold it to take care of Karisa's children.
Hawa hawajasema lolote, wala tuliwafuata kufika pale walikuwa wameondoka.
All the workers were tested, but perhaps sensing trouble, the management never released the results of their blood tests to them. Workers only gleaned that something was wrong when they and members of their families started getting ill. Eric speaks of one symptom of lead poisoning that many men in Owino Uhuru and in that factory suffered from, but few would speak of.
Hata nguvu za kiume hakuna kwangu kabisa tokea wakati huo. Baba nilikuwa na bibi wawili, waliweza kukimbia, kila mmoja akaenda kwao. Sasa hii hata wamerudi, lakini tumerudi tu tunakaa tu hivyo hivyo, lakini hakuna shughuli yote inaendelea kati yangu na kama bibi na mke.
Eric is now forced to live ashamed of himself for someone else's sins that seeped into his blood. George and his family now mourn their elder brother, part remembered in photographs that are corroded. Tragic irony, but just part of the story of Owino Uhuru.
I would say I was very naive because I had worked for business all this time, and I had very, very good relations with all the government agencies, the people who were working for government agencies. And I believed that they were good and they would take action if they knew this was going on. I actually believed that they would. I thought it was a very easy thing.
Did that happen?
No. That's when I understood that when you represent business, it's different, and when you represent poor communities, it's a totally different ballgame.
By late 2009, it was apparent to Phyllis that nobody would stand up for the people of Owino Uhuru. They were in the grips of lead poisoning that was making their lives at the time difficult, and at the time, they didn't know what was wrong. But as Pastor Anastasia Wambo, a well-respected church leader and resident of Owino Uhuru, would find out, it would make their children's lives difficult in future. We met her going through her youngest son, Daniel Basil's photographs. From a young age, he had a serious, business-like demeanor, and his grades showed it. But after Metal Refinery EPZ opened, Daniel fell ill. Anastasia also noticed something else.
Huyu mtoto alibadilika, lakini ukiangalia performance yake kuanzia KG1 alikuwa anashika position 1. Hata KG3 kusoma alifanya kurukishwa na akapita hivyo hivyo, lakini sasa baadaye akaanza kuwa tu yarudi nyuma, performance inarudi nyuma. Hata mpaka leo sasa yuko class 8. Uwezo mtuma akazunguka hapo ndani ya nyumba akarudi akakaa.
Mwalimu ananiambia perform vizuri. Mama wangu siku moja akaja akaniambia na hii virus ya lead yanidhuru kiafya na pia kimasomo.
Joanne reached out to Phyllis and they decided to take action. Phyllis set up an NGO that would put pressure on the government chemist to test 3 children from Owino Uhuru for lead poisoning. Daniel was one of them. All of them tested positive for lead, with Daniel having 23 parts per million of lead in his blood. They were presented to the Ministry of Public Health and NEMA, but nothing happened. So they went to the streets. And to the Public Health Office, also writing to NEMA.
Tukaenda mpaka Public Health kwenda kujulisha mkuu wa Public Health for trees. Nikapenda mpaka na makaratasi ya Kelvin. Hawakuchukua advantage yoyote. Wanatuambia tu nendeni mnataka kutufuta kasi. Ndungu ndiye alituchipu ule mkuu wa Public Health for trees.
I have never seen anybody who has come complain. The only person who has officially and we have communicated with most of the time, the whole business is the Mzee Mtaa.
Tulienda NEMA, tukaenda Public Health, kutoka huko akaturudisha tena kwa chief. Tulirudi kwa chief akatuambia ya kwamba tutulie, atashughulikia hiyo maneno, haina haja sisi twende kule ambapo kunahusika. Tukarudi tena kwa Ndungu akasema ya kwamba hii Kenya ni ya kitu kidogo, kwa hivyo hatuwezi kushindana na mwenye pesa. Ndungu mwenyewe ndo alisema.
Correspondence in our possession shows that at least by 2011, NEMA and public health officials in Mombasa had been made aware of the serious health problems being faced by the residents of Owino Uhuru and the factory workers in the metal refinery. But their responses to the claims were very curious. For instance, in a letter responding to Phyllis's claims, a NEMA legal representative wrote back to her saying that they would investigate what was happening, but there were strangers to the allegations being made by Phyllis about Owino Uhuru.
NEMA said that there was a stranger.
Yes, in a letter to this organization saying that you would investigate, NEMA said quite clearly that it was a stranger to the allegations of lead poisoning being made.
I don't understand that by saying you were a stranger.
If you
Yes.
say that you're a stranger to
Yes.
the allegations,
Yes.
it means that you don't know.
Yeah, that's a letter I want to actually see, because our standard operating procedures are very clear. When a complaint or an incident, the first thing is to verify.
Eventually, after pressure from the residents of Owino Uhuru, the refinery would close down. But even the date that the factory did close down is in contention.
The factory never closed in 2014. The factory was closed by myself in the year 2011.
Our records are very clear. Because that's what I'm saying. My records are very clear, and some of the facility stopped because there's no way it will have continued to operate when we have not issued a license to operate a recycling facility.
And yet it seems to have continued.
That is another issue. That's why I'm saying unless there were illegal operations.
The factory did close in 2012, but only temporarily. In 2013, the factory would reopen under a new name, Max Industries, but not under a new owner. There is no record to indicate that the owners of Metal Refinery EPZ and Max Industries are different entities. And so did they operate in 2013?
They tried to operate. They started, let me make it right, they started to operate. They operated for some time just the same way of being a test run on what the facilities that they had brought in.
But early on, it was clear that the priority in closing the factory was not the safety of the people of Owino Uhuru.
As I agree, the members of the public were in danger. But you understand that if I put up an assistant force to say that from today you move off, you expect this, you understand the type of forces will come in, because whoever had invested that money will bring a lot of forces. So you look of all the best technical ways of knocking off.
That statement captures why it is that today in Owino Uhuru, around almost every corner is a person with a heartbreaking story of their illness, resigned to the fact that only the powerful have a say in their lives.
Cowards, they suffer a lot, but they live long. Sasa hiyo msemo huwa nachukulia kweli, sisi maskini tunahangaika sana na hii shida zetu za chini chini,
kwa sababu ni waoga.
Sisi waoga, lakini wale wenye wako navyo wanaweza kufanya tu lolote. Tanifanya nini?
Few people here actually know whether they have lead in their blood. All they feel is a pain when they walk, or the shame they feel when they look at their children. Proving that it was the lead smelting factory next door that brought them their current fate has been too hard a goal to reach. One that they are constantly in prayer about. So we decided to prove this along with them. By taking blood samples from a large enough number of people in Owino Uhuru to be representative of the entire community, we would know just how many people had unsafe levels of lead in their blood.
Sorry.
We took the blood samples of 55 people, going from house to house, from young children to old men and women, as well as former smelter workers. We started with Kelvin Musyoka. It's not the first time that people in Owino Uhuru have had their blood drawn to test for lead, but this is the first time that it's been done on such a wide scale. 55 people, which would be more or less representative of a population of about 3,000 people. Now, if we do find that there are traces of lead that are above normal in the blood of these people, then it's proof positive that the factory that was operating right next to Owino Uhuru and the people who owned and ran that factory are responsible for not just infecting men, women and children, but for leaving that environment in the way it is for many years to come. Lancet Laboratories would send the samples to South Africa for testing, and a week later got back to us with the results. And they were telling. All the people we tested had traces of lead in their blood. 21 out of the 55 people had traces between the levels of 1 part per million and 4 parts per million. 23 people had traces ranging between 5 parts per million and 9 parts per million. Among these people were 2.5-year-old Philemon Otieno, his cousin Salma Khamisi, who had 6 parts per million and 8 parts per million of lead in their blood respectively. 11 people had lead traces above 10 parts per million. Among those who had traces above 10 parts per million were Kelvin Musyoka with 12 parts per million, Daniel Bazil who had 11 parts per million, and Catherine Akello who had 12 parts per million. 8-year-old Joanne Mary had 14 parts per million of lead in her blood. 4-year-old Brenda Wakio had levels of 20 parts per million, the highest of any child we tested. All of the smelter workers fell in the category as well. The lead levels of their blood predictably were the highest, ranging from 16 parts per million to above 30 parts per million. The highest level of lead in blood being that of 32-year-old Khamisi Dio, who had 33 parts per million of lead in his blood. According to the World Health Organization, there is no safe level of lead in the blood, meaning that all the people we tested are in danger of lead poisoning. At the University of Nairobi's Department of Chemistry, environmental chemist Godfrey Wafula corroborates this. Even though the factory was closed in 2014, the residents of Owino Uhuru are still in danger of continual lead poisoning.
You would find it in the water, in the soil, in the food. Yeah, because once it gets into the soil, it will be absorbed by the plants, including the vegetables, and then it will enter the food chain.
This was an issue that baffled us as well. Was the very soil in which the children of Owino Uhuru played, the water that its residents drank, and the plants they grew laced with poisonous lead? In the course of searching for environmental health and safety experts in Mombasa to help us test the soil and water in Owino Uhuru for traces of lead, we found one man with a story of yet another metal refinery that operated in Mombasa between the years of 2009 and 2011 that spoke to the impunity with which metal refinery plants operated and a blatant disregard for the lives of people where they operated. This is Farouk Adnan Kuria, originally an engineer with expertise in fixing boilers, a key component in any metal refinery. He would be hired by a metal refinery working out of Changamwe called Kenya Metal Refinery Limited. He would be hired on a full-time basis, but soon things started falling apart.
I was concerned about safety of the employees who were working for Kenya Metal Refineries. As far as I know, when you work for a lead factory, your PPE, personal protective equipment, should be as good as a person who is working in a nuclear plant.
He says he was already suspicious about the company, but it all came to a head when he was called by one of the company's directors. A truck ferrying cargo belonging to the refinery had been stopped by the police, so he was asked to go and investigate.
I was charged with dumping of toxic waste at a public dumping site. And it was true. The truck that was arrested was going to dump toxic waste at a public dump site, which, in my view, would find its way to the water sources nearby and kill thousands of people, livestock, you know.
Do you think that they had tried this and succeeded before?
Yes, they had done that before, and they had done that many times until they were caught.
Farouk claims that the waste was dumped in 2010 at a water pan in Jomvu, not far from Owino Uhuru. If this was true, then we would find at least trace amounts of lead in the soil and possibly in the water there. So we began our mission to find out whether there was lead in the water and the soil at Owino Uhuru, also including the area that Farouk spoke of. A few weeks later, officers from SGS, the company we had contracted to take these tests, wrote back. Kenya has not determined its own standards for air quality or soil quality, leaving environmentalists here to draw on the more commonly accepted or most stringent standards reached in other countries. SGS chose soil quality standards from agricultural powerhouse, the Netherlands. But even to the naked eye, you could tell that there were problems in the soil caused by lead. At the Jomvu water pan, we noticed what looked like dried paint on some of the soil. That, we were told, was lead. The lead deposits here must have been extremely high, in spite of the fact that Farouk was arrested over the dumping of lead ash here 5 years ago. A few weeks later, we would know for certain just how tainted the soil at Jomvu and Owino Uhuru really was. As was the case with the blood tests, the results spelled bad news for the people. Every single one of the soil samples taken had traces of lead, many of which were above the Dutch target value of 85 milligrams per kilogram. The highest lead levels were recorded at the water pan at 522 milligrams per kilogram, 6 times higher than the target value for lead. The report was explicit on the risks posed, stating, and quote, "The results indicate that the topsoil has higher concentration of lead compared to subsurface soil at the area of potential concern. The lead in soil exposes danger to children and women. Outdoor activities where individuals come into contact with lead-contaminated soils represent an exposure pathway that can be significant." There were no traces of lead in the water, but experts believe that this could be because of the alkalinity of the water that would cause lead in the water to be deposited in soil as sediment, rather than bind into the water if the water had more acidity in it. But lead in soil is in fact extremely dangerous. The report continues. When children play outdoors, lead-contaminated dirt and dust can get on hands, clothes, toys, and food. Putting these items in the mouth can lead to ingestion of lead. Children can also breathe lead dust or lead-contaminated dirt stirred up by the wind or by outdoor play activities. It isn't just the people at Owino Uhuru that could be in danger. The animals feeding on napier grass growing in the same soil already seem to be manifesting symptoms of illness, meaning that milk or meat from livestock and poultry here would have traces of lead.
Hii nyumba ilikuwa na kuku imekufa yote.
69-year-old David Mahala used to sell chicken to supplement his pension. All of them died while the factory was operating. But he too has a ream of results that he goes through from time to time, reminding him of the factory that changed his fortunes and his life. He has 8 parts per million of lead in his blood, and his doctors tell him that has aggravated his arthritis. But if lead is a problem for the elderly, it is especially damaging for children. Children absorb more lead than adults, thus it can result in developmental and neurological damage. To check whether the brain development of the children of Owino Uhuru could have been affected, we sought the help of child psychologist Lillian Awimbo. 9 children, some of whom had tested positive for lead, with the consent of their parents, would take various tests to assess what their learning capabilities were.
We are going to, first of all, the first stage is we're going to take them through a test, so to speak, that is going to be to access their psychomotor. Basically, what we are looking for at that stage is how their mind works, the speed at what the mind works, and we'll be able to access the development of their mind. And then from there, we are going to also have work with them with like play therapy materials.
Yet again, the news wasn't good, giving the parents yet more to worry about. The report said, and quote, "All children except 2 are quite low-paced. This in essence means that the child is very slow in thinking. The capacity to translate this thinking into action is equally slow. The child best thrives under very little or no pressure at all. Any external pressure can create stress. Majority of the children were found to cherish in overview rather than in details. This essentially means that the child finds it difficult to comprehend details and thus struggles with academic performance. Matters related to depth and concentration are mentally challenging. Consequently, the child may appear to be slow in learning. Based on the parameters of time and accuracy, most of them were found to be unable to perform a task effectively, and the use of logic was a serious challenge."
Aliye sababu kampuni ya Metal Refinery imenimaliza pamoja na watoto wangu, nyumba yangu yote. Kelvin Musyoka huenda angekuwa kiongozi wa siku zijazo. Kelvin angenisaidia siku zijazo, sasa sijui sasa maisha yake hapo katikati.
Scholastica puts in words what many here are seeing unfold in front of them. A generation of children whose future may have been stolen from them.
Yes, I'm shocked, but I also know Kenya, I'm a Kenyan. I grew up here, but I'm shocked. But I can see that this is not actually, I am convinced and I know that this may not be the only factory operating below standard in Kenya.
Why wouldn't you?
But who are these powerful people? Who would come into Kenya, ruin the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, and get away clean? We accessed records both from the Registrar of Companies in Kenya and the Indian Company Registry that showed the 2 owners of Metal Refinery EPZ as Shantilal Tokarse Vora and Kumarkant Vora, a father and son duo based out of India. It is their company that opened, ran, and eventually closed Metal Refinery EPZ on and off for a period close to a decade. But they had a local partner, Hezron Awiti Bolo, the current Member of Parliament for Nyali constituency. Allegations had been made that it actually was Awiti Bolo who, from time to time, would represent the company's interests as a partner of the Voras.
Mheshimiwa Bolo nilijaribu kuongea naye, hata alituita ofisini kwake, tukaenda. Tulipofika akasema, bwana, nyinyi mtaka hii maneno, ile kampuni ni yangu. Mama, wewe acha maneno mengi, useme hii habari ya kuandamana haina maana. Na hii kampuni hii Kenya ni ya watu wenye pesa. Na ukisema ati ya kwamba mtaandamana, nyinyi ndio mtapoteza.
But every public official we spoke to would exclude his name from the list of people who would be held responsible for the damage caused at Owino Uhuru.
The Owino Uhuru people are the ones sitting in his land.
So not only is the Owino Uhuru land his, but it's also the factory is his and they were co-owning.
So you can imagine that you have put up a plant, a lobe of the land, 3 quarters of the land undeveloped, people come and settle here. So possibly, he is using his own way of kicking them out.
His own way of kicking
Possibly, I don't know. Possibly, because you need to go and look at the documents of that.
We had to establish the ownership from this company, the Registrar of Company, and we didn't find his name.
But the committee was looking in the wrong direction. Had they searched for the names of the owners of the complex in which the factory was built, they would have found the Nyali MP's name in black and white. A document drawn in 2007 pointed to an agreement between Habo Agencies Limited, Metal Refineries EPZ, and Penguin Paper and Book Company Limited. The document, signed by representatives of these companies, stated that an agreement for the setting up of the metal refinery on the premises of Harbour Agencies was cancelled, and the premises would instead be set up on the property of Penguin Paper and Book Company. Bolo, in his conversations with the people of Owino Uhuru, never denied owning the property in which the factory was built, but a check at the Registrar of Companies doesn't include his name on the ownership of Harbour Agencies Limited. It has the names of two associates, Elias Wataga Ochieng and Monica Anyango Awiti. However, Harbour Agencies is a subsidiary of Mombasa-based Harbour Group of Companies, which, according to its website, has interests in freight services, port security and entertainment. Harbour Agencies was founded in 1995 by Hezron Awiti Bolo. Penguin Paper and Book Company, the company in whose complex metal refinery EPZ would be set up, according to this agreement, has three shareholders: Vishamkar Tikmadas Adnan, Jayprakasha Bojwani, and Hezron Awiti Bolo. Hezron Awiti Bolo's PO box is registered as 95165 Mombasa, the same box number as minority shareholder in Harbour Agencies, Monica Anyango Awiti. When we contacted Bolo for an interview over his role at Metal Refineries EPZ, he initially agreed, saying that he had nothing to hide. But when I called him prior to the day of the interview, as well as the day we were supposed to meet, he rescheduled the interview. Then,
I've been trying to call him most of the day. This is about the 7th call that we've made. And this has been the order of events. Let's see if he tries to pick up now. Alright, yet another call going unanswered. Well, I can't say it's unexpected that the Member of Parliament for Nyali wouldn't respond, considering how heavy the allegations would be against him with respect to co-owning the go-down from where the metal refinery operated, and the fact that quite a number of people in the neighboring community of Owino Uhuru have died since. But it would also behoove him as a Member of Parliament to try and at least clear his name if he believes indeed, as he had explained to me on Monday when we first spoke, that he is innocent of any claims of misdeed or fraud with respect to that.
He also did not respond to other calls and messages we sent him regarding the issue. Threats, bribery, and intimidation have been part of the story in Owino Uhuru as well. Nearly everyone we spoke to told us stories of how the campaign to get the factory closed and treatment for the people would often attract the wrong kind of attention, something we encountered twice during our visits to Owino Uhuru.
It's the second day of our visit here in Owino Uhuru slum, and we were meant to speak to quite a number of people who say they've been suffering from symptoms likely to have been caused by lead poisoning from that factory over there. But as you can see, there's nobody here. And the reason for that is when we left yesterday evening, a lot of rumors started being peddled about our presence here and what we were meant to do. People said that if people spoke to us, the people who are suffering spoke to us, then all of these houses here would be destroyed by the government as a result of the lead poisoning. Things that are completely false. But who can blame the people here? After all, there hasn't been any justice that has been served to them because of the lead poisoning, despite the fact that years and years after this smelter was opened and closed, it still stands there, and the lead poisoning continues to seep into the blood of children, women and the men who live here in this slum. Living in Owino Uhuru since 2007 might be dangerous enough, but it appears talking about it is just as dangerous. While we were taking samples from the people here to test their blood to see the levels of lead that they have in their blood, Phyllis Omido, the lady who's been defending these people since 2007, received an SMS from a number that she doesn't know, telling her to stop lying to Kenyans about Owino Uhuru. It would appear that whereas the situation here is dire, there are people who have an interest in this story not coming out, because this isn't the first time that she's been threatened by SMS.
In spite of the waves of evidence that continue to build against the owners of Metal Refinery EPZ, as well as Kenya Metal Refineries, no attempt has yet been made to track them down. No attempt, in spite of the need for justice in Owino Uhuru, or those affected by dumping of lead waste in Jomvu. Yet, it was another need that brought the owners of the metal refineries east, across the Indian Ocean. And looking at the sheer mass that is India's population, it is easy to see why the owners of the metal refineries would make the trip.
For slightly over 1 billion people, the subcontinent of India is one of the world's biggest markets, with market demand that can devour pretty much any product. Lead is such a product. Demand for lead was so high locally that it became expensive to source and produce here. And that's why lead smelters turned to Kenya.
Our goal here is to find 4 men, Shantilal Tokarse Vora and Kumarkant Vora, the father and son duo that operated the metal refinery next to Owino Uhuru, as well as Chandra Prakash Mehta, Kamlesh Mehta and Navin Patel, the owners of Kenya Metal Refinery Limited, responsible for dumping of lead waste in Jomvu. But in one of the world's most industrialized nations, that would be no easy task. Enter Savio Alves. Savio, like Farouk and Phyllis, also had knowledge of the inner workings of the Kenyan lead smelting operation. He was a director with the CP Metal-led Kenya Metal Refineries, but knew Shantilal and Kumar Vora, the owners of Metal Refinery EPZ, the factory next to Owino Uhuru.
Initially, I was the one to help them out with the paperwork part of it. That is the EPZ license, the NEMA license, and the other still setting up of the factory, the import of the machineries. Basically, that was my activity.
Savio would witness firsthand the cruelty with which workers were dealt with at Kenya Metal Refineries, not unlike what we had heard from Farouk.
We had a team of people from India who had experience in lead manufacturing, and the way they used to talk to the local Kenyans was not up to my approval.
You see, if you abuse me in a language that I don't understand, it will not affect me in any way. But when somebody explains to me what you have just said, obviously I will react. So there were very, very many fights like that, to the point that the employees actually stopped working.
But it was when he visited Metal Refinery EPZ in Changamwe that he knew he couldn't play any further part as an investor.
When I visited your factory in Mombasa, and I seen the factory based just above the village and people down there, I was shocked, dismayed, that people who had been in the lead business for so many years could put up a factory and expose the people down there to lead.
Through a contact of Savio's, we were able to get the location of Shantilal and Kumar's offices in Kalwa, a region within Mumbai, so we set off to confront them. Tucked in between apartment buildings and other industrial factories, we eventually see the distinctive chimneys of a metal refinery. From a distance, the factory looks run down. Rust has eaten up important parts of its machinery, but there still seems to be activity around the factory. This is the headquarters of Metal Refinery EPZ's owner's operation, a location that no doubt, should the government choose to pursue them, would be important to note. We are met at the door by someone who introduces himself as Bhaskar Mudaliar, the manager of the plant. He leads us inside of what seems to be an operation on its last legs. Soon, we find out why.
So you have a plant in Indonesia, you have a plant here in Mumbai, and one in Kenya.
All 3 plants.
All 3 plants.
We are maintaining with Shantilal.
Yeah.
All 3 plants we are going to maintain.
Okay. So you bought them off. Why did they sell the metal refineries?
actually they are unable to run the show because due to some inconvenient, there is no other person looking after properly like that.
Yeah.
Production problems, a lot of internal problems I think so.
Yeah.
Lot of internal problems.
They run out of money?
Huh?
They run out of money to run the business?
Yeah, they have lost so much money and other they have lost so many people's not make payment in time. All payments are outstanding something I think so. Like that. In view of that, they are unable to run.
Were there any other problems in Kenya specifically that made them close apart from?
Bhaskar is a representative of PT Radi Logam Indonesia, a mineral exploration company that develops base metals like lead, zinc, and chromium. Metal Refineries is the company's newest acquisition. Shantilal and Kumarkant weren't just running the refinery in Kenya, they also had one in India and Indonesia, but were unable to manage them. Much as the company has vast investments in Indonesia and India, we were interested to know whether they were looking west towards Kenya.
No, nothing. Actually, according to me, it is a very good business in Kenya. According to me, I heard that very good business. Barabar na Kenya एकदम अच्छा था. According to me, I heard that very good business in Kenya comparing with other Indonesia and.
You mind switching that off?
Basically, what these factories were doing is they were buying the used batteries, used vehicle batteries from Kenya. It was available quite cheaply in Kenya rather than the cost here. The local batteries were much more lower in price compared to Indian batteries.
When do you think you're going to start in Kenya?
Kenya also we are more interested to start, but depending upon the once I have our person already visited last week. I think maybe Kenya unit or some other work I don't know. We are having a lot of production, chemical production, steel production, not only lead. So for that chemical production he has gone for marketing or for Kenya unit he has visited, I don't know. Just now he is back to Indonesia.
So Kenya might not be lead, you might be doing steel, you might be doing other things.
I heard that some government interest, that lead product they have stopped with some.
The export of lead.
They have planted something.
Yeah.
Is it true?
So the people who own the factory in Mombasa have another factory down this road. In fact, they've run it for quite some time. We came here and we tried to track them down and ask them the questions that need to be asked about what was happening in Kenya. But it appears that they're selling off their company after what the people who are managing it right now claim is bad management. These people also will own the Kenyan factory and perhaps will reopen it to produce metal and other products.
And as we talk now, there's a third transfer which is on my desk. And these are issues we want to address fast.
Essentially, once the sale of Metal Refineries is complete, Shantilal and Kumarkant will have distanced themselves even further from the woes their company caused in Kenya while they operated it, and should NEMA approve the license application by PT Radi Logam, the community may once again be at risk of further poisoning.
Why would the Kenyan government allow the dirty linen of the surrounding countries be washed in Kenya, for the pure lead to be sent away? Was it for the foreign exchange?
We tried calling both Kumarkant and Shantilal while in India, but to no avail. We also wrote to Kumar Vora on the only available email address listed on a company search site linked to Kumar. He is yet to respond. We then went in search of the owners of the second refinery, Kenya Metal Refinery Limited, accused of dumping toxic lead waste in Jomvu. Workers in the refinery alleged that the lead waste could have been dumped in various locations in Mombasa more than 15 times.
I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of that. I have to be, me as Zephany Ouma, I'm not aware of that, because that will amount to contravention of our conditions of the highest order.
Behind Kenya Metal Refinery Limited are Chandra Prakash Mehta, Kamlesh Mehta and Navin Patel, 3 men of Indian origin.
So they were holding 60% of the shares, and I think each of them had 20 each.
Interestingly, none of the officials we spoke to even knew that Kenya Metal Refineries had existed.
To the best of my knowledge, I think yes, it was. No, I haven't. No, I haven't. No, I haven't.
Unless I guess that there were facts. I think I was not aware of that. I have to admit, at the management, you might not have a grasp of all these things unless you get briefs and get this file to study to understand.
After closing shop in Kenya, they retreated back to India, with Chandra Prakash and Kamlesh coming back to run a pharmaceutical company, KK Pharma, yet another place that Kenyan authorities would need to know should they want to pursue the owners of Kenya Metal Refineries Limited.
Hello, good afternoon.
A middle-aged man in glasses meets us once we enter the office. This is Kamlesh Mehta, brother to CP Mehta, the principal operator of Kenya Metal Refineries Limited. We asked to meet CP Mehta.
Send what? But he doesn't even know what we are asking. So we need to ask him the question.
His contact details on your email ID. So I cannot give. I am not authorized to give his personal details to anybody.
Alright.
What is your name? My name is Kamlesh. K.
Kamlesh K.
Were you part of the partners of the company back in Kenya, Kamlesh?
No.
Do you know where the other partners are?
I don't know about them. He was running the company. I am running this office.
You're in this office, okay.
Later, we show Savio the footage of our encounter with Kamlesh.
This guy is Kamlesh Mehta, the youngest brother of the KK Pharma group, the same group that was in Kenya, the main group behind Kenya Metal Refineries.
Word seems to have got round that we're in town looking for the proprietors of Kenya Metal Refineries, with the men involved seemingly trying to avoid us. We would also go in search of the two brothers' partner, Navin Patel, the third partner at Kenya Metal Refineries. He owns Shyam Oxides, a company that deals in lead-based products, the one that would often buy lead from Kenya Metal Refineries. He too was unavailable.
Going through the records, I come to know that the business for about 1.5 years with Kenya Metal, if I'm not wrong.
Kenya Metal Refineries.
But later, we managed to get Navin on phone to comment about what happened in Kenya. The bitter voice at the other end of the phone revealed a frustration that we had not yet heard from any of the proprietors of either Kenya Metal Refineries or Metal Refineries EPZ.
Any time they just change the rules and regulations without any consulting the investment, those who are back the investment, without consent middle of the night, they just change the rules and regulations.
They changed the rules and regulations while you were trading? How much money did you lose?
As I told you, I am not interested to, again, open that chapter again. I just want to open that chapter.
The changing of rules he refers to is a ban on lead exports from any country within the East African community imposed in 2009. This would affect refineries working under export processing regulations, effectively rendering their businesses useless. But if the ban on lead exports was imposed in 2009, how were both Metal Refineries EPZ and Kenya Metal Refinery Limited able to export lead between 2008 and 2013?
Yeah, that should be an interesting case. It's something that I need to verify. Yeah, I have to admit that is not brought to my attention.
The building housing Metal Refineries EPZ still sits on a hill overlooking the villages of Owino Uhuru. Its high walls blocking out any sight of the suffering that still takes place today. Before we left for India, this was what it looked like behind these walls. Mountains of used battery cell cases strewn in almost every possible space, and a pungent acid smell hanging above them. A clear indicator that neither the government nor the owners themselves bothered to clear away the waste from this factory. Owino Uhuru's residents are no better off than they were before the refinery began its operations. In fact, the weight of the lead in their blood is slowly draining the life out of them. But there still is a stubborn determination in some of them to carry on and fight. Scholastica Shikanga, knowing that she couldn't keep her grandson Kelvin in the same environment, searched for an alternative home for the boy. She found it at the Lady of Mercy Children's Home, a few kilometers away from Owino Uhuru. We went to visit her and Kelvin one final time at the children's home. Here, we find Scholastica bent over a mound of clothes, furiously washing every one. It's the only way she can afford to keep Kelvin here.
Yeye mwenyewe kwa hiari yake alikuja kutusaidia, lakini huwezi mtu akusema ati nimekuja kujisaidia ukamwacha bila. Lazima uangalie kitu chochote umpatie.
Kelvin is adjusting to life here, although he still doesn't play as actively with the other children. Lead poisoning is still a problem for him. But Scholastica is determined to fight on for his sake.
Mimi ni mnyonge, yeye ni mpunga nyali, lakini nina kama vile ukiwa na imani, sababu sasa ni kuweka Mungu mbele. Nikiwa na imani, hata mwenye pesa na ukiwa mnyonge na Mungu awe pamoja nao, tunaweza shinda hii vita.
Today, all of these children are supposed to be in school, but they were sent home.
Sasa leo nilipowapeleka ikawa amefukuzwa. Sasa mmoja akiwa ni Kevin amefukuzwa, na nimekwenda kuzungumza wasifanye kitu kama hicho, wasaidie watoto kusoma badala ya kuwafukuza. 150 ya mchezo kila mtoto.
We leave the home with Scholastica still bent over the same pile of clothes, determined to do something to change her grandson's fate.
I think by now it's safe to assume that the lead factory, through means that were corrupt, opened, ruined the lives of so many people, closed, and the owners went wherever they went. If you want to know the true cost of corruption, in this case it's 150 shillings. That's the amount of money that Kelvin Musyoka's caretaker can't pay for him to go to school because he doesn't have activity fee. That's the true cost of corruption. It's extremely frustrating to do a story like this, knowing that there are people out there who caused Kevin to be in such a position, that are free. Quite honestly, these are the days that you hate being a journalist.
Weeks after word had gone round that we were seen in the vicinity of the refinery a number of times, vehicles began being seen at Metal Refinery EPZ once again. The vehicles appear to have been removing items from the factory, seemingly either in preparation for a new occupant or to avoid leaving any traces of evidence. Hopefully though, things will change for Kelvin, Scholastica, and the people of Owino Uhuru. The Senate Committee on Health has investigated their plight, and its report has been tabled, awaiting debate.
Of those people and possible compensation was also what we recommended, and of course culpable people to be dealt with.
The County of Mombasa also seems interested in helping those who are unwell in the community.
And we took samples from 50 members of the public who are all above the age of 5. And we took the samples to the government chemist for analysis. And from there, the results were sent to the Senate committee for release.
But as for those who operated the factory, the consequences of their actions are still unspecified, yet to be defined.
Everyone who ever signed a document to approve this thing, everyone who ever put their signature on anything that was approved to put this plant there, has blood on their hands.
If the crow flew over Owino Uhuru, it would see the injustice in a society where the poor have the dignity of good health taken away from them.
Public health have a lot to answer. They tried to close, but